You're listening to Big World Network.
Bloodshot Buck, Episode 6, written by W.H. Wood and Mitch K. Allan. Read by Willow Wood. James shot everything as easily as swinging his arm. He made it look fluid, a simple process of take aim, hold breath, squeeze trigger, reload. He glared down the barrel and absorbed every kickback like a well-oiled machine. Ava tried not to be jealous. They stood on the firing ramp, rifles trained on the holographic screen down the other end. No matter how she squinted, blinked or shifted, her vision blurred. She shot 3 civilians and hit 12 enemies. James hit 27 and missed 1. No casualties. The lights came up and the alteration made Ava's eyes water. She rubbed them hard to avoid being noticed. "Buck, the hell are you thinking?" cried their instructor. Ava turned to the control booth behind them and stared at her boots, hoping she could hide her eyes by pretending to be embarrassed. "I don't know, sir," she said. "Sorry, sir." "Do you need to go back to basic training?" She clenched her jaw. Pretending to be embarrassed wasn't so hard. "No!" Later, in the changing room, Ava sat on the side bench for a long while and massaged her knees, her thighs, her ankles. Everything ached, like her flesh was a fungus rotting into her bones. Her eyes would not stop watering. It was impossible not to rub them. "Stop it! Stop it!" She had to get it together. James and Michael were already in the gym, both starting with the mandatory jog on the treadmill. James going at a slower pace. Maybe if she picked the mill furthest from Michael, there'd be no jibing comment about her shooting. But then, she supposed, Michael wouldn't be fricking Michael. "So, I thought you said you were a natural," Michael called across James's shoulder. "Play it cool. Don't snap. Don't sulk. I am such a badass." "You've hit 18 civilians the past week," he went on. "You need your eyes checked." "No, I don't." They deem her unfit for duty. She couldn't stand to be backbenched, like James. James had acquired aplastic anemia. Such a condition was too much for an active soldier. Training to use his blood could kill him, and far-out missions were not an option just yet. But James could still fire a gun. Ava's success with settling wouldn't mean anything if she couldn't hit her targets. She tried not to cringe as her legs pounded to the rhythm of the treadmill. "I'm just not used to holograms. They're harder to focus on. Maybe you need glasses." No way. It's just all them moving pixels. You wait till I get hold of an LSW. That sounds like a civilian massacre. Ha! Where every civilian is named Gibson. James snorted, drawing their attention. He continued to stare at the opposite wall with the same blank glare he aimed down a rifle, but a smirk touched his lips. Some of Ava's burning shame ebbed from her gut. James was a synth biologically, but not in practice, and he never would be. Ava could tell he regretted everything. His face transformed when he grinned, and she hadn't realized that until now. She'd always been preoccupied by his massive shoulders and sculpted arms because, dear God, did he have a hobby before signing up for the synth quarter? But now that the smile lines around his eyes rarely showed, she missed them. With his subtle accent and loud, cheerful remarks, Ava had taken for granted how much of an anchor he'd been during the shuttle months with Michael and Daniel. "I am going to flatten you on the mat later," Michael said. You couldn't flatten a stingray, she replied. Oh, lucky there ain't much of you that isn't already flat. You dick! Shaking his head, James stopped running and hopped off the mill, already breathless. Ava felt relieved to see that his smirk hadn't vanished. I just want to sit on my ass and never ever get up. Ava's legs were on fire. It was like suffering from pressure change all over again. They throbbed and ached, and someone please just hack them off. She ducked Michael's fist but stumbled, and his shoulder careened into her chest. They staggered and hit the training mat with a yell. Get off! She cried, shoving him in the jaw. Oh, jeez, I'm sorry. You missed. Ava didn't reply, head swimming and lights flashing inside her skull. She'd never been unbeatable in hand-to-hand combat, but she'd never been shit either. She could shoot, too. She could. Get it together. Someone will notice. A hand enveloped her shoulder. Buck, said James. You all right? I'm sorry, said Michael. I didn't hit you that hard. It's not that. I can't see. The sounds of the gym pounded in her ears, and her veins pulsed as if ready to burst. James touched her forehead. You're burning. Nah, your hands are just warm. She pushed him away and grappled onto her feet. From the look James gave her, Ava knew he wasn't convinced. But how could she complain to him? I'll take some Cyrozine and I'll be fine. How did Neni always look so refined? What ailments did she have, and how did she overcome them? Don't be a pain, said James. Just sit down and take a break. He folded his arms and jerked his chin at her. You can kick our asses later. Well, he still knew what she liked to hear. A smile, he said. Christ! He shared a look with Michael, and Ava couldn't believe the hypocrisy of it all. She didn't rejoin the sparring match. The thumping inside her skull seemed enough to disorientate a dingo. Ava half-watched James and Michael instead. She noticed the structure of their physiques and how they utilized their different strengths, and how careful Michael was not to actually hit James in case he bruised. She thought about muscle weave, bone strength, joint ligaments, fueling her desire to be a top-notch Marine. No, synth now. One day, she thought, watching Michael grow dizzy and feverish. One day I'll make a difference. At 2:15, she headed to meet Neni. Ava tried not to scratch her seething legs. It didn't exactly make a dignified entrance. At least her headache was gone. Neni's back was turned to her as Ava approached the training room, and she slowed, catching a few of Neni's words. I just don't think there was enough evidence to rip his veins out. I will not alter my report. What if it had been a child? Neni hefted a duffel hanging on her shoulder as she spoke to a square, blue drone that Ava remembered had a name beginning with G. A human voice responded, her tone authoritative and full of static.
Look here, Prout, this ain't a debate. Arzuma is being grilled, longer than necessary, and it's a setback for everyone. Read through the evidence again. It's there. Our job is justice, not pandering to some social moral court back on Earth. We do the job no one wants to admit needs doing.
I don't think...
You weren't conscripted to think politics. Do your duty. You're a goddamn justice. Am I understood?
Neni bounced on her feet, clenching and unclenching her fists. Ava realized she was holding her breath and tried to distract herself by removing her jacket. Yes, ma'am, Neni said. She gave a curt nod, and the drone bleeped and reorganized its structural pattern.
Justice Prout, it said. Captain Chellick would like to rendezvous with you at 1500.
Tell him I can't, she replied softly. I'm with my student until past.
Will that be all?
Yes, Gimbal. Flourishing its holograms, Gimbal flew off down the corridor, and Ava sprang to life, quick to resume her approach as if she'd never stopped to eavesdrop. What was Neni's gripe? A botched mission? A cover-up? A murder? Ava's mind ran away with a dozen wild possibilities. She cleared her throat. "G'day, Justice," she said. Neni jumped and forced a smile, tucking escaped curls behind her ear. "Buck, it's good to see you." "It is?" "Of course. Who else do I get to boss around?" "That's how it is, eh?" Ava shook her head in mock disappointment. "Hit me where it hurts. I thought we were on a par." "Not yet." With a chuckle, Neni opened the training room door and stepped inside. The same fiberglass vacuum greeted them, muffling and amplifying their movements all at once. "How'd the mission go?" Ava asked. Better to dive right in. Nonchalance was the only way to get gossip out of some folk. Neni's shoulders stiffened. "What?" "You said you were on a mission this week, right? Found some blood traders 700 clicks from here?" Some traders thought that camping on the enemy's doorstep was the best hiding place, but only the desperate still believed that. The just were nothing if not thorough. Neni busied herself with the locker, her smile gone again. "Yes," she said. And Neni was nothing if not vague. Ava wanted to sit her down, meet her eye to eye, and bully out a proper conversation. "Maybe I make people uncomfortable," she wondered. "So?" Ava prompted. "How'd it go? Yes? No? Did trader, caught trader, pants around his ankles trader?" "We caught them," Neni muttered, passing Ava a visor. "Where on earth is Bite? I know I booked her." "I guess she's busy." "So what happened? Were there many? What is standard procedure with blood traders anyway? I hear they get all kinds of people killed by giving out impure blood. How bad is it? Their network, I mean. Are there really more blood traders than drug dealers? Sounds like scare crap to me. If that were true, there'd be a bucket load more synths out there, unless the death rates are higher than reported. Never checked now that I think about it. But all the same, the Catharia wouldn't stand for their people being constantly abducted. I heard—" "Stop!" Neni snapped. She slapped the visor still in her hands for emphasis. "I'm not allowed to talk about it. I don't wish to either." Guilt filled Ava's lungs as she noticed the slight shake in Neni's breath. "I'm sorry," she said, voice huskier than intended. Neni didn't seem to absorb her words. In the silence, Ava heard her blood roaring in her ears. She shoved her visor on her head, and Neni roused herself. "There's no point without Bite here," Neni said, and put her visor away again, indicating Ava to do the same. "We can practice without targets. Here." She opened the bag on her shoulder and pulled out 2 braces. "These are for you." "Ace! Thank you!" Ava slipped them on, snug around her forearms, and depressed the top button. A shallow blade appeared. "Slow down there. I can sense my blood already," Ava said. "I've been practicing. I can feel it at night. The whispers and echoes." Neni looked at her curiously. "Do you like it?" Ava stopped herself from blurting out yes. Her question felt like a test, a personal assessment. "I suppose," she replied. "It's not horrible." She couldn't tell if she passed or not. "We must leave the door open," Neni said. "There's no drone to tell us outside activity." "Shitty little thing. She's probably worked up over the way someone changed a light bulb." Ava could only imagine the things Bite might say about that. "Today I will teach you to shoot. It's not too hard. Each shot will match the pulse of your heart. Very effective if your adrenaline's pumping. For a shotgun force, slice your palm. For pistol rounds, slice your fingertips." "Which is better?" "Both. It's circumstantial." Her gaze softened. Try whatever you feel you can cut. Already dosed on ibuprofen and Cyrazine, Ava could barely flex her fingers, but cutting them... She took deep breaths. It won't hurt. It won't hurt. It's easier to slice your palm on your first try. Less joint to catch, and the millimeter of blade is designed so it won't sink too deep. 1, 2, 3. Ava held her breath and swiped her palm. She acted so fast it made Neni jump. Think of a target. Ava faced the opposite wall, raised her hand and held her wrist. Blood dribbled into her bracer. The open wound burned, but she felt the mechanism housing in her shoulder, the coil, the hammer. Sensing the rifle in her arm, it didn't take much more to force out 3 shots. As each one hit the wall, a wicked pain lashed further up her arm, and she winced. Neni stared at her in shock. The trick is to let your consciousness die before the blood hits the target. Ava gave a nervous laugh. Right. It's hard to let go. Because it's a small death. Nah, that's a bit morbid. I'm just tense. Crikey, though. A bullet in your arm. She applied pressure to her hand, unwilling to feel liquid gush down her veins in cold flushes again. Mnemonic helps, Neni said, clearing her throat. I clench my fingers, and I can usually sever my mind before collision. For the next hour, Neni demonstrated shooting techniques, where to aim at a Catharian compared to a human, and explained the basics of skin grow, a medical gel used by synths to maximize their recovery time. At the end of the session, she gave Ava a tube of the stuff. Ava smeared the clear paste across her cut skin. It instantly soothed the wound, heating her whole hand, and the blood frothed a milky pink. With care, Ava's palm would have nothing but a silvery scar after 24 hours. Neni clutched her stomach and said, You seem to have fully settled, Buck. Now that you're better, you're wanted as a witness next week. 2 synths are on trial, but their final judgment has been hanging on your account of... Neni's eyebrows creased and her words cut off as she peered at the space past Ava's shoulder. What part of I'm busy until half past failed to get through to you? She said in a sharp tone that Ava rarely heard her use. What? Ava blurted, worried she'd somehow upset the woman again. But Neni's gaze was still focused elsewhere, and Ava turned to look behind her. A tall, dark-skinned bloke filled the doorway, looking as if he wished he could shrink. He chanced a little wave.
I was waiting outside,
he said, his rumbling voice clashing with the whiny tone of his words.
But the door was open and you looked just about finished and... Hello, is this the fabled new student?
Ava heard Neni make a couple noises of protest as the man crossed the room in a few strides. Damn, but he was huge, in a broad-shouldered, strong-chested sort of way. Up close, Ava couldn't help but notice the pudge hanging around his belly and the shots of grey through his hair. More surprising was his genuine, almost girly excitement as he held out his hand to her. Captain, Private Buck. Buck, this is Captain Arkadash Chelik, Neni said, defeat in her voice. He's a giant pain in the ass, and you should ignore everything he says. Well, she got the giant part right. Pleased to meet you, Captain, Ava said, shaking his hand firmly. She turned to grin at Neni's joke, but the Justice wore a tight, forced smile. Maybe they weren't friends?
Yes, it's nice to foil Neni's plot to keep you all to herself,
Captain Chelik said, a warm smile spreading across his face. Ava half expected him to wink. I'm sorry, Neni said, her voice hard and clipped. I have to go. Ava dropped the captain's hand. What about the trial? Do I need to know anything else? But Neni was already racing across the room.
Are you all right?
Captain Chelik asked, turning to watch Neni with a frown creasing his forehead. Fine, Neni said, still terse. She didn't slow her steps. "I have to go." With that, she disappeared out the practice room door. Chelik turned back to Ava with a raised eyebrow. "I think she's sick," Ava said, unsure what to say, alone with an officer. Although Chelik did seem sort of silly for a captain. She kept rubbing her tummy. Maybe that was her side effect? Nausea was pretty common from what Ava had heard. Neni didn't seem like the sort of person who could survive puking in public. Chelik rocked from foot to foot, blinking at the space Neni had left.
Neni doesn't get sick,
he said, so quietly that Ava thought he was talking to himself. Then he seemed to remember she was still there.
I mean,
he said louder.
It's unusual for her.
Ava shrugged.
I'm sorry to cut our meeting short,
Chelik said.
I should go check on her.
Ava remembered how Neni had snapped at her earlier, the argument she'd been having through the drone. If Ava had been that tired and fed up, she'd probably run to her quarters too. You'll probably just wind her up, she said, before realizing, oh, wow, talking to a captain here, Buck. Even if he was bouncy and cheery. Chelik just smirked back as she cringed.
Oh, I do that anyway. Neni's no fun until you wind her up,
he said. Dodged that bullet, Ava thought.
I'll see you around,
Chelik said, walking backwards out of the room.
The three of us, lunch, sometime, I promise.
Okay. Ava waved a little uncertainly. Sir? She stood there for a moment, abandoned in the training room. Taking a deep breath and nodding to herself, Ava began to laugh, unsure what else to do. It turned into another, spinning headache. Man, I'm going to bed, she said to herself. Neni had the right idea. Neni didn't let out a breath until she slammed the door of the little transport shuttle. She thumped her head back on the seat and covered her face with her hands. Don't vomit in the car. Don't vomit in the car. Don't think about EVA BUCK slicing her hand open, or small deaths, or John's gooey fried egg eyes, or Ark's people pies. Wow, NENI-LOHI PROUT, you are such a mess. Had she been so excited, so eager, the first time blood shot out of her palm? Neni could barely remember now. But 9-year-olds were excited by anything, weren't they? She pushed the heels of her hands into her eyes until she saw swirling lights. The passenger door clicked open.
Well, that was rude.
Neni blinked to see Arkadash slide into the passenger seat and calmly shut the door. Half of her wanted to immediately scream at him to get out, but the car felt like a safe bubble. He looked straight out of the windscreen and didn't say anything else. 3:30 was the switchover for afternoon lessons in the practice building. Neni couldn't have chosen a busier time to storm out. Synths and justices swarmed the small pavement outside, stepping into and out of small shuttles. There was Bite, the little traitor, slinking into the lobby. Neni sank down in her seat. Arkadash's hand rested lightly on his chest. Did you chase me? Neni asked.
Only a little,
he puffed.
Next lunch date, I'm on the salad.
Neni fought back a smile. Arkadash, get out of my car. Her anger scuttled away with Ark's silliness, and now she just sounded tired and sad to her ears.
Are we fighting?
Arkadash asked.
I didn't know we were fighting.
Not yet, we're not. A shuttlecraft circled the asteroid lazily, heading for the docks behind the Center of Operations' domed roof. More recruits, maybe? Or the just returning from a mission? Neni couldn't decide which was worse.
Buck thinks you're sick,
Arkadash said.
Does that kid seem lonely to you? She seems lonely to me. I was thinking one day we could take her out for...
Neni let Arkadash's chatter wash over her, hearing one word in 3. Buck thinks I'm cool, she thought. That was the problem. One day it would be Ava stood over dead criminals, asking herself if it was worth it.
But I told her you probably weren't sick, because you're Nenni the super synth. The 1 in 100 with no side effects.
Nenni let her eyelids flutter shut.
Please, she groaned. You didn't say that. Only because I was busy chasing you.
Nenni remembered John, back when they were still friends. How stunned he'd been to find out that Cathar DNA fitted her perfectly.
No side effects,
he'd said.
It's like you were born to be a synth.
That had given her the edge, increased her chances of getting into the ranks of the just. They treated it like a superpower, like it had been a good idea to inject herself with alien genes as a child. Like screwing everything up for your drunk dad and starving your little brother was super at all. Was that the only reason the Justicate had spared her all those years ago? Because the DNA was perfect? Would she and Fen have been smeared on the floor, like those traders, if she'd coughed or vomited or had a nosebleed? You fucked the mission up, didn't you? Arkadash said. Nenni's eyes snapped open. What?
Your shadowing thing. Is this what this is about? You're still in training, Nenni. You don't have to be great all the time.
I didn't fuck up, Nenni said. That was Azuma. That was Hara. That was John with his weird, disinterested gaze. Are you going to get out of this car? Arkadash turned and looked at her for the first time. Nenni sighed and palmed the dash. Justice Residential Block 6, she said clearly. The shuttle car's internal lights flickered on, and the vehicle turned until it joined the main rail leading away from the practice building.
3 minutes,
it chirped back at her.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to BigWorldNetwork.